You know, the reason I like traveling North America is not only because of the huge cities, the culture, or the curiosities along the way, it's also because of the food. Or, to be more precise, because of the fast food.
Yeah, I might have mentioned it in earlier videos. Here in Canada, where I am right now, and also in the neighboring country, the United States, there are all these kinds of fast food chains and all sorts of unhealthy products that simply don't exist back home in Germany, where I live. And I have to admit, it is quite fun to try them all out. There are also many different flavors of familiar snacks and especially soft drinks that I've never seen in my life. For example, Fanta Pineapple or Fanta Pina Colada, or the Coke I just bought with orange vanilla flavor.
But what is also quite interesting is, here in Canada, but also in the United States, some of these products are even made completely differently than back home in Europe. And there is one quite famous example you might have heard about not that long ago.
Just a few months back, US President Donald Trump proudly announced that Coca-Cola in the United States will soon be made with real sugar, no longer with the so-called high-fructose corn syrup. At first, that sounded pretty strange to me. I hadn't really realized that Coca-Cola could even be sweetened with anything other than sugar, but apparently it can. If you look at the label in the US, the second ingredient after carbonated water isn't sugar, it's high fructose corn syrup. In Canada, it's something even more complicated. It says sugar, glucose, fructose. And only in Mexico, the bottles say what you would actually expect: azúcar or cane sugar. In the US and Canada for many years, there's been an ongoing debate about health concerns since corn syrup is considered harmful and you'll find it in all sorts of products. But when it comes to Coca-Cola, it seems the US president really did get his way. Well, sort of. Just a few days before this video was released, the first Coke bottles made with cane sugar were shipped to selected cities and retailers in the United States, as the company confirmed to media.
Well, and I think that's the perfect chance for a little deep dive. First, what on earth is actually high fructose corn syrup? Second, is it really that unhealthy? And third, why the heck is it inside Coca-Cola bottles in the United States and obviously in Canada, but not in Europe and allegedly also not in Mexico? Well, turns out there's actually a quite interesting story behind it that many people don't know. And in this video, I'd like to tell you all about it. This is how high fructose corn syrup ended up in Coca-Cola. Well, but before we talk about the reason for this unusual ingredient inside Coca-Cola bottles, let's first answer the question, what actually is high fructose corn syrup? And to find out, we have to brush up a little bit on our biology knowledge.
The biggest difference between high fructose corn syrup and regular table sugar lies in how they are made. Traditional sugar, also known as sucrose, comes from sugar beets or sugar cane. High fructose corn syrup, also known as HFCS or isoglucose, on the other hand, is a liquid sweetener made from cornstarch, and that also affects its composition. Both types of sweeteners consist of glucose and fructose, but in corn syrup these two are separate, unbound molecules. The ratio of glucose and fructose can vary. Commercial HFCS typically contains between 42 and 55% fructose. That makes it slightly sweeter than regular table sugar. In table sugar, which comes from sugar beets or sugar cane, glucose and fructose are always bound together in a 1-to-1 ratio, which keeps the sweetness consistent.
Exactly because of this higher amount of fructose, corn syrup is under criticism, because fructose is suspected of contributing to certain diseases.
For example, obesity, fatty liver disease, high blood pressure, diabetes, and gout. The direct link to the sweetener hasn't been clearly proven yet, but studies suggest that increased consumption at least coincides the rise of the obesity epidemic, and that excessive intake of HFCS in high-calorie drinks could play a role. A 2015 study by the University of Utah also drew attention. In an experiment with female mice, researchers found that the mortality rate doubled when the animals were given a mix of fructose and glucose instead of sucrose. Their fertility also dropped by about a quarter. Researchers at the Yale School of Medicine discovered another effect. HFCS acts differently on the brain, preventing a feeling of fullness. That too may strengthen its link to obesity.
In the European Union, where I live, high-fructose corn syrup can also be found in some products. This was mainly supported by a new sugar quota regulation in 2017. However, the big boom of this ingredient never really happened in the EU.
If we take a look at the German market, for example, where I live, corn syrup is rarely used in food products. That's what the Federal Institute for Risk Assessment found in a 2021 study. Less than 1% of all foods recorded in their database listed it as an ingredient. When it does appear, it's mostly in baked goods like bread, pastries, cakes, sweets such as chocolate, candy bars or gummy candies, and ready-made products like instant noodles, instant rice or frozen pizza. Isoglucose is also added to some snacks and sports nutrition products.
In the United States, but also here in Canada, this ingredient is much more common. And that, of course, brings up one question. Why? Turns out there is an interesting story behind it, and that story takes us back to the 1970s.
In 1971, the United States made a surprising sale of American grain to the Soviet Union. At that time, President Richard Nixon called it the greatest grain deal in the history of mankind. But even that deal already showed signs of cronyism, as media reports from the era suggest. Contrary to the promises, it wasn't the average American farmer who benefited, it was a handful of large corporations. The deal triggered a boom in corn prices and a massive expansion of cornfields across the country. Prices eventually fell again in the 1970s, but thanks to the government subsidies, farmers kept planting corn on a large scale. The result, a massive overproduction of corn.
Well, and that had direct effects on huge corn processing companies. One of those companies is called Archer-Daniels-Midland, and that company suddenly had so much corn that it had to find new business models and markets to make profit.
The US magazine Mother Jones once traced these events in an article. Archer-Daniels-Midland, or ADM, tried to branch out into two new business areas. One idea was to use corn for ethanol production, shaking up the gasoline market. The other, to introduce high-fructose corn syrup to the soft drink industry and challenge the dominance of the sugar business. The hoped-for ethanol boom didn't happen at first, but the idea of corn syrup turned out to be a huge success. And that, it seems, had quite a lot to do with the company's particularly close relationship with US politics.
Archer-Daniels-Midland at that time was led by a man called Dwayne Andreas. American media at that time called him maybe America's biggest campaign donor, and he was also, among other things, involved in a controversy around the Watergate affair. But Andreas was apparently also a key figure for the hype around corn syrup. In the 1970s, he lobbied for a quota for sugar produced abroad to boost his own business. And well, with that plan, he was quite successful.
In 1981, Ronald Reagan became president of the United States, and he was known to be a close ally of Andreas. Reagan eventually signed a law that set strict quotas on sugar imports. According to Mother Jones, that move immediately drove US sugar prices to double the world market level, making corn syrup a far cheaper sweetening option. And the soft drink companies soon reacted. Starting in 1984, both Pepsi and Coca-Cola in the United States switched from sugar to corn syrup. Today, HFCS is firmly established in the United States simply because it pays off. Corn production is heavily subsidized and less syrup is needed to achieve the same level of sweetness since the fructose content is so high. On top of that, the syrup is made from genetically modified corn, which makes it even cheaper to produce.
The interesting thing is, when it comes to Canadian Coke, you hardly find any information about this whole topic on the internet. You don't really even find out what's exactly inside those bottles. Here it doesn't say high fructose corn syrup, it says sugar, glucose, fructose, and apparently that's the same thing, or isn't it?
In fact, I wrote an official press request to Coca-Cola, but unfortunately never received an answer, even after multiple inquiries. But there is an official website of the Canadian government which says when there's written sugar, glucose, fructose, like on the Coca-Cola bottles in Canada, it means sugar or glucose fructose singly or in combination. In my opinion, even that explanation is a bit unclear, but according to several news sites, high fructose corn syrup is apparently also part of Coca-Cola in Canada. And the high use of this product is mostly linked to the North American Free Trade Agreement called NAFTA. Between 1994 and 1998, NAFTA eliminated tariffs on food and beverage syrups containing HFCS, while tariffs on syrups made with cane or beet sugar remained in place. This change in tariff structure led to a significant increase in the supply and likely the consumption of HFCS also in Canada. One study showed that this was associated with an increase of about 41.6 kilocalories of added sugars per person per day in Canada. And apparently, especially when it comes to Coca-Cola, it will stay that way. According to media reports, the new ingredient using cane sugar initially applies only to the United States, but not to Canada.
In many other countries, corn syrup obviously doesn't make that much sense economically. There's actually a map on the internet where you can check in which countries Coke is made with corn syrup and in which countries it's made with sugar. And it seems like the company always chooses the cheaper option in the country at that time.
Interestingly, according to Newsweek, even in some European countries, high fructose corn syrup is used in Coca-Cola. For example, in Croatia, Hungary and Kosovo. In some countries, both are used, real sugar and HFCS, such as in Argentina and Japan. But most countries, from South America through Europe to Asia, use real cane or beet sugar. And apparently that's still the case in the third North American country, Mexico. This causes quite a hype, especially in the United States. On social media, there are hundreds of videos of Americans crossing the border just to drink the real Coke. In some restaurants, Mexican Coke even appears on menus as a mark of quality. But at the end of the day, one thing remains clear. Whether this popular soft drink is made with corn syrup or real sugar, if you're looking for something healthy to drink, Coca-Cola probably isn't the best choice.
So,
here we are, back from Toronto. It's a bit dark in here. I hope you can see me. But yeah, that's the end of the video, so it doesn't matter anyway. That was my story about the secrets of Coca-Cola and other soft drinks. And if you liked it, then please leave a thumbs up. You can also hit the subscribe button and ring the bell so you won't miss any upcoming video. And if you'd like to support me and my work, that's also possible, for example, on Patreon, or you can become a channel member on my YouTube channel. And there will be one last video from Canada, which will be published next month. So if you don't want to miss that, please subscribe. And so far, I would say, have a safe journey and see you next time.